This is Human Baseline. We are not here to talk about biohacking, sleep optimization, or performance hacks. We focus exclusively on the basic biological requirements that science broadly agrees on for the average human.
And today, we're examining the upper limit of that requirement. We often hear about the minimums, that happens when we don't get enough.
Right.
But the data presents a clear boundary in the other direction as well. We're looking at the consensus from the National Sleep Foundation, the American Academy of Sleep Medicine, and physiological reviews on that transition from sleep to wakefulness.
So the focus here is on the concept of the 9-hour ceiling. We're basically asking, is there such a thing as too much of a good thing?
Exactly.
Because, culturally, I think we tend to view sleep like money in the bank. If 7 hours is good, then 10 must be great.
But the sources you've pulled suggest that biology has a very strict policy on that.
It's more than just diminishing returns, then.
It's stricter than that. It's more like a bell curve. The mission for this deep dive is to define that biological ceiling and to explain the mechanics of oversleeping, what's technically known as sleep inertia.
And to understand why the brain struggles to, wake up, even when it's had more than enough rest.
Exactly.
So let's start with the hard numbers. We have this consensus from the major bodies in sleep medicine. Everyone knows the 8 hours rule of thumb. But what's the actual established rule?
The baseline is, it's remarkably consistent across all the literature. For a healthy adult, and that's defined as ages 18 to 64.
Okay.
The requirement is placed strictly between 7 and 9 hours.
Now, usually when we see ranges like that in health guidelines, they feel like minimum targets, eat at least this much.
Right.
They're saying 7 to 9 isn't just a minimum.
No. And that is the crucial distinction. That range is the functional window for baseline health.
The whole window.
The whole window. The consensus is very explicit. They note that sleeping more than 9 hours on a regular basis is generally only appropriate in very specific contexts.
And what are those?
They're pretty limited. They're talking young adulthood, because the brain is still developing, or individuals recovering from a significant sleep debt, or someone who is dealing with an illness.
So if you're not sick and you're not recovering from, say, pulling 3 all-nighters,
Yes.
then going over 9 hours is biologically unnecessary.
It's classified as unnecessary and potentially counterproductive. The literature suggests that for the vast majority of adults, 9 hours is the functional upper limit.
A ceiling.
It's a biological floor of 7 and a ceiling of 9. Think of it like calories or water. You need a certain amount. If you take in double that amount, you don't get double energy. You just get a different set of problems.
Which brings us to the feeling, the sensation of hitting that ceiling. I think everyone has had that Saturday morning. Alarm is off. You decide to sleep in until, 11 a.m. You've slept maybe 10 or 11 hours. You expect to feel amazing, but instead you wake up feeling heavy.
Right. The sensations is often described as feeling like you've been sedated.
Exactly. And it's confusing. The logic says you should feel fantastic, but this is a real documented thing, isn't it?
It is. It's technically called sleep inertia, but colloquially, and maybe more accurately, it's often called sleep drunkenness.
That is a very descriptive term.
It's accurate to the sensation and, to the impairment level. The symptoms described include grogginess, disorientation, a feeling of physical heaviness in your limbs.
The fog.
A distinct mental fog. It is this paradoxical state where you've slept well beyond the baseline, but you wake up feeling physically worse than if you'd slept less.
Let's unpack the mechanics of that paradox, because that's the part that feels so unfair. Why does the body create a feeling of exhaustion when it's fully rested?
To understand it, we have to stop thinking of sleep and wakefulness as just a binary switch. You're not simply off or on.
It's a process.
Biologically, waking up is a process. It's a chemical and electrical transition that takes time.
So it's not a light switch, it's more like a dimmer switch.
Even more mechanical than that. The sources use an analogy that really fits. Think of it as an internal brake pedal.
Okay, an internal brake pedal.
During sleep, your brain is under the influence of sleep drive. This is largely a chemical pressure. Throughout the day, as you burn energy, this pressure builds. It acts like a brake pedal being pressed down.
Slowing everything down, keeping you in a state of rest.
Right. So sleep is the process of easing off that brake.
Ideally.
Ideally, yes. By the time you wake up, that pressure should be gone and the brake is released. But when waking occurs, especially if it's abrupt or if it happens after a super long sleep where you've drifted back into deep stages,
the brake pedal doesn't release right away?
it doesn't. It gets stuck.
So your foot is still on the brake even though you're trying to accelerate.
Precisely. The heaviness or drag that you feel with sleep inertia is basically the residue of that sleep drive. Your brain is trying to engage, but the chemical environment inside is still partly configured for sleep.
And that lag can last for a while.
It can last anywhere from 15 minutes to an hour.
And that explains that feeling of waking up wrong. It's not that you're tired, the braking mechanism is still engaged.
Correct. And if you mistake that brake pedal feeling for actual tiredness, the instinct is often to go back to sleep.
Which just keeps the foot on the brake.
Exactly.
Now, the research goes even deeper than the chemistry. It talks about a cold start problem with actual fluids in the brain. This was surprising to me.
Yes.
We assume the moment our eyes open, the brain is fully ready to go.
But the physiological reality is quite different. Research indicates that cerebral blood flow velocity, so the actual speed of blood moving through the brain, is significantly lower right when you wake up.
So it's an engine that hasn't warmed up yet. The oil is still thick.
That's a perfect analogy. It can take up to 30 minutes for that blood flow to get back to its baseline waking levels.
So when you wake up and feel like your brain is slow, it's partially a fluid dynamics issue.
The fuel isn't reaching the engine at full pressure yet, and it's not uniform across the whole brain, which makes it even trickier. It's not that the whole brain is slow. Certain parts come online before others.
The brain boots up in regions.
It boots up in regions, yes. Like a computer.
Okay, so what loads first?
The posterior regions, the back of the brain, they tend to come online relatively quickly. These are the areas for basic sensory processing. You open your eyes, you see the room, you hear the alarm.
The hardware works and the input is happening.
The input works. But the anterior regions, specifically the prefrontal cortex right behind your forehead,
That's the executive center.
that's logic, decision-making, emotional regulation, complex thought. All of that is much slower to get going.
So using the computer analogy, the desktop is loaded, the mouse moves, you can click on things, but the actual applications are still buffering.
That's exactly the logic loads last concept. There is a real executive function gap. You're awake enough to walk to the kitchen, but you might not be awake enough to effectively prioritize your day or solve a complex problem.
This explains a lot about morning irritability. If the emotional regulation center is the last thing to turn on, you're basically running on pure impulse for that first half hour.
You are. You're operating with a much more primal subset of your brain. And there was comparison in the source material about just how significant this impairment is.
This was the stat that really stood out.
It challenges our intuition completely. We know that being awake for 24 hours straight is terrible for cognitive function.
It's severe impairment.
It is. But research has found that the cognitive impairment immediately after waking, during that severe window of sleep inertia, can actually be worse than the impairment found after 24 hours of no sleep.
That's staggering. So you are more impaired in those first few minutes than if you hadn't slept at all.
In terms of complex processing and logical accuracy, yes. Now, the key difference is duration. The inertia impairment fades. The deprivation impairment lasts all day.
Right.
But it highlights why that first 30 minutes can feel so incredibly difficult. It's a state of severe but temporary biological impairment.
It really reframes the morning. We think of grogginess as a mood, but you're describing it as a temporary neurological deficit.
That's what the data indicates. It is a functional limitation of the hardware until the warm-up is complete.
Which brings us to a specific scenario that really breaks this baseline, the weekend myth. Because I think for a lot of people, the 9-hour ceiling sounds fine in theory, but in practice, they're using the weekend to pay off the debt from the week.
This is one of the most common disruptions, the classic catch-up strategy.
The scenario is so familiar. You sleep, say, 6 hours a night during the week, you build up a deficit, then Saturday comes, and you sleep 10 or 11 hours to fix it.
And this creates a state known as social jet lag. You're essentially flying across 3 time zones on Friday night, and then flying back on Monday morning, biologically speaking.
But the real issue for the 9-hour ceiling is what happens during that recovery sleep itself.
Right.
The quality is different.
It's fundamentally different. When your brain is sleep deprived, it doesn't just want any sleep. It prioritizes deep sleep.
The physically restorative state.
Right. And during that Saturday night recovery sleep, the brain is starved for this. It dives deep and it stays there longer to pay back that debt.
Which sounds like a good thing. You're getting the deep recovery you missed.
It sounds like it should be. But the problem happens when you wake up. Because the brain has been spending so much time in deep sleep, the probability of waking up out of deep sleep goes way up.
And waking up from deep sleep is the trigger for the worst inertia.
It is the heaviest brake pedal. Waking from light sleep is a relatively smooth transition. But waking from deep sleep is like being dragged up from the bottom of the ocean. It results in the most severe form of sleep drunkenness.
So the grogginess is compounded.
Exactly. There are findings that clearly show this. Research looked at participants who were sleep-deprived and then allowed recovery sleep. They found that when they woke up from that recovery sleep, the participants actually performed worse on cognitive tasks than they did when they were sleep-deprived.
Wait, let's pause on that. They performed worse after sleeping than when they were tired.
Immediately upon waking, yes. The penalty of the transition, that cold start, coming out of that deep, desperate recovery sleep, was so severe that it temporarily lowered their functioning below their deprived baseline.
This explains the Monday morning fog. It's not just in your head.
It's biological. If you binge on sleep over the weekend, pushing past that 9-hour ceiling, you're forcing the brain into a heavy, deep sleep cycle. When the alarm goes off Monday, you are likely ripping your brain out of that deep state.
And the prefrontal cortex is offline, blood flow is low, the brake pedal is stuck to the floor.
You're starting the week with a harder, heavier transition than if the schedule had just stayed consistent.
The baseline really relies on consistency then.
It does. The mechanics of waking up depend on the rhythm of falling asleep. When you breach that ceiling dramatically, the cost is paid in that transition.
It changes how you view the luxury of sleeping in. We think of it as a treat, but the brain treats it like a disruption.
Biology relies on homeostasis. It relies on predictability. The brain is a prediction engine. It wants to know when to start the wake-up process. If you move the target by 3 hours, the prediction engine fails. You wake up with the wrong chemical mix.
So if we look at all the data, the 7 to 9 hour range, the ceiling, the inertia effects, the implication is clear. The system doesn't handle lump sum payments well.
That's the conclusion. The physiology suggests you cannot cheat the baseline. You can't bank sleep, and you can't efficiently pay back debt in big chunks without a penalty. The system is designed for a daily reset, not a weekly one.
So we've established the floor and the ceiling. We've established that the brain warms up from back to front and that logic leads last. And we've looked at why catching up can actually make waking up harder.
It paints a very clear picture of the system's limitations. We're not designed to hibernate, and we're not designed to run on empty. We're designed for that specific, consistent window.
Let's summarize this for the listener. If we strip away all the jargon, what's the one core thing to remember from this deep dive?
The key takeaway is that consistency in the 7 to 9 hour range is what defines the human baseline. It is a floor and a ceiling.
In the next episode, we will look at what happens to the baseline after just one night of poor sleep.